ambitious pursuits of the things in my heart, hoping that my eyes won't see them depart. Human in the emotional parts hidden, because sometimes it feels that laughing too loud is forbidden. Human in the identities deeply rooted within, wondering if the story of who I am is only to begin. But assured of the idea that my story is finite, knowing that even the sun's light won't always burn bright. Yet some things in the ordinary day feel eternal. The soft-spoken touch of a mum, the words scribbled in my journal, the smile of a stranger, the rainbow stretched over the sky that I see. Am I just hopeful, or am I fearful of the small things that define me? Thirsting to know, thirsting to be rational in the unexplainable. Am I seeking something sustainable or even attainable? A last breath, a last step, a last word. Human, 2023, who are we?
Well, hello and welcome to our third lunchtime event. We are at the midpoint of the week, but if this is your first time joining us, you're especially welcome. Just before we get started, if you need the loo at any point, there are some toilets at the back left, just follow the signs, and feel free to head off if you have a supervision or you need to leave early, that's totally fine. And if you are hungry after your first sandwich, please go and get more. It looks like we have overcated this lunchtime. But we're delighted to have you here. This is a week all about the theme of human, who are we, and exploring that question, and does the person of Jesus have any relevance to that? So we're delighted to have you here. I'm just going to invite Mike up. Mike spoke for us yesterday, but if you weren't here, Mike, would you be able to just introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and what's your connection with Cambridge?
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm married to Rachel, and well, now my main connection with Cambridge is that I live here, just slightly outside of the tiny sphere that I knew existed when I was a student, kind of near Asda, if anyone's ventured as far as Asda. But I was also a student here. I was at Selwyn. No, that happened yesterday. And I studied English. Yes! This is a big improvement on yesterday. I think we're up 300%. Fantastic, yeah.
Well, Mike, we're delighted to have you with us. I don't want us to run over, so I'm going to hand straight over now, and we can get stuck in. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So, we're thinking today about violence, greed, and prejudice. What does our anger at injustice show us about who we really are? And I should say, of course, in order to do that, we are going to be thinking about some particularly unjust things that people do to one another. Some of those things quite hard to think about. Police brutality, including sexual violence. And I just wanted to say in advance that, of course, you're fully welcome, as Lucy was just saying, at any time to go to the toilet, to get another sandwich, to take a bit of fresh air. Please feel free to do whatever would help you to look after yourself. And of course, because everyone, is in and out to various things anyway, no one will think anything of it. But as we start, I just want to start with this. I am convinced that how we feel about injustice and evil shows us a huge amount about who we really are. Let me start by asking you, how did you feel when you first saw the footage of George Floyd's arrest and his death? How did you feel when you first saw Derek Chauvin, the police officer, with his knee on George Floyd's neck? Or when you first heard George Floyd saying, "I can't breathe"? Maybe for some of us, the first reaction was shock or disbelief, but I think for most of us, the main thing was rage, right? Anger. We look at that and we think, how dare he? How dare he do that to another human being? That is just utterly, utterly wrong. Or how about in February last year, when you started seeing the pictures of what Russia was doing in Ukraine, the indiscriminate bombing, destroying people's homes, people's lives? How do we feel about that? Again, I think for most of us, the main thing was anger. We looked at it and we thought, you can't do that. That is not okay. Or thinking further back, when the Me Too movement started, and we were just hearing account after account of how men had harassed and abused women. How do we feel about that? We hear those stories and we think, this is just not okay. You can't do that. But let's think about that reaction for a minute. That deep feeling that we have that these things are wrong, that people should not do this. Because actually that deep conviction tells us a lot about who we really are. I was listening to an interview a while ago with a man who had grown up a staunch atheist his whole life, but in his 40s, he said that he had become a Christian by reading the Marquis de Sade. Now that's a pretty weird story because the Marquis de Sade was definitely not a Christian. He was an atheist. But that's exactly the point. This guy said he was reading the Marquis de Sade and it made perfect logical sense to him. His argument, to kind of boil it down to a nutshell, was this. He said, there is no God, there is just the physical world. Therefore, humans are just intelligent animals. So, how can you say that greed is wrong? How can you say that selfishness is wrong? It's perfectly natural. How can you say that violence is wrong? It's completely natural. We are animals. And so the most natural thing in the world is for us to get pleasure for ourselves at the expense of others. And the Marquis de Sade actually lived like that. The word sadism comes from his name, and he was eventually imprisoned for abusing people for his own pleasure. And this guy said that as he read this book, he realized two things at the same time. The first thing he realized was that it was totally intellectually honest. If we really are just animals, then there is nothing wrong with doing whatever we feel like. And if we feel like being nice to people, fine. But if we feel like being selfish and cruel and violent, then if we are just animals, how can you possibly say that that's wrong? Because where are you getting right and wrong from? But the second thing he realized was, I hate this. He said he thought, I cannot believe that it's okay to harm others for my own benefit. It is wrong. Even if somehow tomorrow everyone in the world decided that it was okay, I would still be sure that it wasn't. So the deep conviction that we have that violence and cruelty and all these things are actually wrong, if we're right about that, then we can't just be animals. There must be something more to who we are. There must be something more to this world. I came across something very similar in a book by Sally Rooney. A couple of slides on. Yeah. Let me read it to you. I think this is what Sally Rooney herself thinks. You can't tell because it's a character, but it's the character that's basically exactly the same as Sally Rooney, and it's quite near the end of the book. So I think this is what she thinks. But she says, she's talking about her boyfriend, and she says, he recently asked me if I believed in God, and I said I didn't know. I only feel, rightly or wrongly, that there is something underneath everything. When one person kills or harms another person, then there is something, isn't there? Not simply atoms flying around in various configurations through empty space. I don't know how to explain myself, really, but I feel that it does matter not to hurt other people, even in one's own self-interest. So when we look at violence and greed and prejudice and we say that matters and that is wrong, we are saying we are not just atoms. We are not just animals. We are more than that. We're saying that there is something more, that there is something underneath everything, that there's something underneath us. And the guy who was being interviewed said that one idea, the idea that it wasn't okay to harm others for his own benefit, he said that was the only leap of faith I ever made. After that, he just thought through logically the only thing that could make sense of that conviction. And he said that it was believing in the God who reveals himself in Jesus. Because this is one of the beautiful things about knowing Jesus, is that Jesus makes total sense of that deep conviction that we have that says that these things are wrong. He says, yes, you are more than just atoms. Yes, you are more than just animals. Jesus actually says that the whole Bible says that it makes sense that we don't feel like survival of the fittest is the right way to run a society, or that survival of the fittest is the best way to treat the people around us, because we're not just intelligent animals. We are actually made in the image of God. It's right there on the first page of the Bible. It says, so God created mankind in his own image. Now, what does that mean? It means essentially that there is something in us that actually reflects what God is like, that we are, in a small way, a bit like God. So we can function as his image in the world. We can reflect something of what he's like. So what is God like? Well, the God we find in the Bible is revealed fully and clearly in Jesus. And all the way through the Bible and all through Jesus' life, we see that God is not greedy. He is incredibly generous. He is not prejudiced. He treats even people that others consider worthless and unimportant with unimaginable dignity. I actually have a close friend who told me recently that her life was completely transformed just by sitting and reading through the Gospels, the biographies of Jesus' life, and taking note of every way that Jesus treated women and how he spoke to them. And she said that doing that changed her whole view of herself, it changed her whole view of God, and it changed her whole life. It's amazing the way that Jesus treats people that other people would write off and be prejudiced against. And he's also not violent in the way that humans are, aggressively, selfishly. Instead, in Jesus, we see a God who's willing to die in order to forgive his enemies, in order to make peace. God is a God of perfect, pure justice and of incredible self-giving love. And so when we look at greed and prejudice and violence, and something in us says, that is not okay, that is wrong, I think that's the image of God in us talking. But the thing is, we need an explanation not just for why we have these moral ideals, but also for why we find it so weirdly difficult to actually live up to them ourselves in our ordinary lives. Because very few of us do live up to our own moral standards. I talked a lot about my own failures to live up to my standards yesterday lunchtime. But I think this is true, particularly in our relationships with the people who are closest to us. This is a fascinating insight from Dostoevsky. I love how honest and just relatable and down-to-earth and human this is. So he says this, I love humanity. In my dreams, I am very often passionately determined to save humanity. And yet, as soon as anyone comes close to me, their personality begins to oppress my vanity and restrict my freedom. I'm capable of hating the very best people within 24 hours. One, because they sit too long over their dinner. Another, because they have a cold in their head and keep blowing their nose. And obviously that's true at the sort of ridiculous level, but I think we know it's true at the deeper level as well. And we need to be able to acknowledge and deal with that in order to make a genuinely positive difference. I came across a while ago a fascinating blog by an activist called Kai Cheng Tom, and Tom says this: I've started to believe that I can't create positive change without recognizing and naming my own participation in the oppressive systems that I'm trying to undo. We created a culture focused on confronting others, in part so that we could focus on the failings of others and avoid examining the complicity with oppression, the capacity to abuse that exists within us all. See, if we really want to make a positive impact in the world, we have to resist that urge to avoid examining ourselves. We have to start with ourselves and with the basics, the essentials of human relationships. We cannot just love humanity in general. We have to work on loving the actual human in front of us. So I'd love you to talk to the people next to you just for a minute or two. Why do you think that we find it easier to believe in principles of kindness and generosity and love than to consistently love and be kind to the people around us in our own lives? Why do you think that that might be the case. Chat with the people around you just for a couple of minutes. Okay, fantastic. I'll draw you back. Feel free, obviously, to continue those conversations afterwards. But I think we do need an explanation for that, for the gap between our kind of vision of morality and justice and our kind of everyday interactions. And the thing is, Jesus really makes sense of both halves. He makes sense of why we have these powerful, beautiful moral ideals, but he also makes sense of why we find it so difficult to consistently live up to them. He basically says that we are made in the image of God, but that image has been seriously damaged, distorted, almost vandalized. And it's such that you can still see can we have the next slide, please? The masterpiece of the great artist underneath, but it's been seriously damaged. And Jesus says that is fundamentally because we have turned in on ourselves. He says we are created by this God of love, self-giving love. And we're created to love others and to love God. But instead, we've become full of ourselves. We've become fixated on ourselves. And so all too often, other humans, instead of being people to be loved, become obstacles in our way. And that fundamental self-centeredness is what leads to all the other stuff. It's what leads us to have prejudice against people who aren't like us. It's what leads us to a greed and an apathy that leads us to prioritize our own comfort over even the extreme needs of others. It's what leads us to be violent in defense of ourselves and our clan. It's kind of like if you imagine that somehow all of the planets in our solar system suddenly decided that they all wanted to be the one that was at the center, that everything else was revolving around. What would happen if somehow they all sort of tried to do that? They would crash into each other, or they would spin off into the isolation of empty space. And that is what has happened with us. And this is, at the deepest level, what Jesus is talking about when he talks about sin. It's why we feel so often kind of stuck and helpless when we think about the injustice and the evil in this world. We care about it, we hate it, but we feel like there's nothing we can really do. And often we end up just kind of feeling guilty about our own involvement in these things, or sort of just pushing it out of our minds and not really thinking very hard about whether we live up to our ideals at all. And so either way, we find ourselves feeling stuck and exhausted. And this is why I find Jesus so life-giving, because he offers us a way out of that exhaustion. He offers us a kind of hope. So let me just tell you one of my favorite stories from Jesus' life. You can find it in 3 of the different accounts that we have of Jesus' life. And basically, Jesus is teaching in a house. It might actually be his own house, we're not sure, but he's teaching, and there's this huge crowd who've come to listen to him, so much so that it's absolutely jam-packed in there. And there's a man who's paralyzed, and him and his friends are desperate to get him to Jesus because they believe that Jesus is the one who can heal him. But the thing is, they're carrying him on his mat, and they can't get him in through the crowd. Everyone's too tightly packed. And so they do something outrageous. They climb up to the roof of the house. There would have been stairs on the outside. And they start to dig a hole in the roof. And you can imagine the people inside gradually starting to hear something kind of scrabbling up above, and then the dust starting to fall, and people kind of looking up and coughing, and then clods of dirt falling down, people probably shouting, and eventually they make a hole big enough, and they lower this guy down, and they put him right in front of Jesus. And Jesus looks at him and he says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." And I absolutely love that from Jesus. Because, I mean, it's an example of how he treats people with dignity, right? This is someone who many of the people in the crowd would have judged and written off. They would have thought, I mean, he was economically completely worthless. He was a burden. But Jesus looks at him and he does not think he's worthless. He's not angry with him for digging a hole in the roof. He's not angry with him for interrupting or for pushing in. He just looks at him and he loves him and he calls him son. But then the other thing I love is that he doesn't treat him like he's just pure victim. It would be really easy to look at someone who suffered that much and think they are just 100% a victim. But the fact is, that's never the truth, is it? None of us are pure victims. We are all part of the problem in this world as well. And Jesus knows that, and he looks at this man and he says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." He offers him complete, instant, full forgiveness, complete freedom from guilt before God. And the religious people who are there are outraged by that. They're outraged. They're thinking, how dare he? How dare he claim to be able to forgive sins? No one can do that but God. And of course, they've got a point. Because who has the right to forgive something? Only someone who's actually been wronged by it. You know, if one of you punches another one and I say, "Oh, I forgive you," that's insulting. It's got nothing to do with me. What have this guy's sins got to do with Jesus? But this is the claim that Jesus is making. He is saying, I am the artist. I am the creator. I made this man in my image, and I made everyone he's ever hurt or wronged in my image as well. And so I am more hurt by anyone else than anyone else by the ways that he has vandalized and distorted that image in himself and in others. Because I am the artist, I have the right to forgive. And ultimately, Jesus has the right to forgive because he came to suffer the consequences of all of the ways that we've wronged others and wronged God in our place on the cross. He offers us this incredibly deep forgiveness. But then Jesus turns to these religious people and he says, look, which is easier to say? Son, your sins are forgiven, or rise up, pick up your mat and walk, so that you may know that I have authority to forgive sins. And he turns to the man and he says, son, rise up, pick up your mat and walk. And the man does. He gets up, his legs start working again, and the place goes wild with joy and amazement. So what's going on there is that Jesus is proving that he has the right to forgive by showing that he's also got the power to restore. He is the artist. He's the one who can restore his damaged images. He can renew us to be the masterpieces that we were made to be. He can remake us today so that we actually begin to live out the love and justice that we long for. So we don't need to feel that sense of being stuck, of being helpless, because Jesus longs for us to come to him like that man so that he can forgive us for all the ways in which we're part of the problem in this world. And he can restore us and renew us and begin to make us a part of his solution, a kind of channel through whom his restorative power flows out in love to others. So let me just say, if you're a Christian here this lunchtime, have you brought your anger about the injustice and evil that people do in this world to Jesus? Have you come to him and let him open your eyes to the ways in which you're part of that problem? Have you let him forgive you for those things? And have you asked him then to do what he did here, to renew you, to give you hope? The Bishop Augustine, back in the 4th century AD, said this: hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. Ask Jesus to restore you and renew you and empower you to be as angry as you should be about the injustice in this world. And then to have the courage and the strength to really go and be a part of the solution, to be a person through whom his love and forgiveness and transforming justice flow into this world. Or maybe you're here and you're not a Christian, you're just exploring these things. Maybe you know a Christian in college or whatever. I wonder if you've noticed that there's anything kind of different about them. If you have, might I suggest that it might be this? That it might be that knowing Jesus has changed everything for them, because it means they don't just know what they want to stand for. They don't just know what they want to stand against. They actually have something solid to stand on. They have a real understanding of why they can look at evil and injustice and say, that is wrong, that is not okay. And they, much more than that, they know that they've come to Jesus and he has forgiven them for all the ways in which they are part of the problem. And day by day, bit by bit, he is transforming them, renewing them to make them people of love and justice who can be part of the solution. So please, can I encourage you, if you're just exploring these things, why not take a closer look for yourself? Because Jesus really longs to do that for you as well. Whether you think that you have nothing to do with Christianity at all, he longs to do that for you too. So really, I'd encourage you to look at who he is and whether or not he has the power to do this. Please come back to the other events this week. There's 2 more brilliant events even today, at dinner and then in the evening. And then there's so many good things on the rest of the week. See what you can make it to. Come to as much as you can. Find out more about Jesus. And while you're doing that, why not take one of the biographies of Jesus that are free on the bookstall at the back and have a look with your own eyes. You'll be able to find the story that I'm talking about now. You can check whether I'm actually telling you the truth about what happened. Just take a closer look for yourself and see what you make of Jesus. Because I think that if you honestly listen to how you feel about the injustice and the evil in the world, the violence, the greed, the prejudice, I think that anger is telling you something really important about who you are. It's telling you that you are not just atoms, that you are not just an accident, that you are not just an animal. That you were made for love, and you were made to love. And that is because you were made by the God who is love and who introduced himself to us in Jesus. That is who we really are. So, I'd love you to spend a bit of time chatting to the people around you and submitting questions on the pigeonhole. As you do, please do have a look at those different speech bubbles and discuss with each other which of those best kind of captures your reaction to everything that you've just heard. Or you can make up your own if none of those feel like they describe you. But share that and then talk about why. You know, if you say, I don't want to think about this, why? If you say, I believe this, but it's not having the impact on me that it should, why do you think that is? Have a chat about that. And as you do, please turn all of those things into questions and upvote any that you'd like to hear a response to. I mean, even if you literally just, you articulate why you think you don't want to think about this, even if you just put it on the pigeonhole, not even as a question, but just to get my response, I'd love to see that and just upvote anything that you'd like an answer to. So we'll have a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll be back up to do the Q&A. Thanks.
Well, we're going to draw back together now. Sorry to break into your conversations. We've got some great questions. So we're going to just answer them in order of popularity. If you haven't typed in the Pigeonhole link, why not do that now, and you can vote for your favorite questions, or it's not too late to submit a question now. We'd love to hear what you think. So the first question we've got, why doesn't God do more about injustice if he hates it so much?
Oh, yeah, this is an excellent question. And in various forms, it's a question that the Bible itself asks many times. Time and time again, you hear people crying out, why, God? How long? How long are we going to put up with this? One thing I'd say is, please, would you come back this evening? Actually, both the international dinner and the evening event will look into this question of what's going on with all of the suffering and the pain in the world, and if God's really loving, where is he in that? I'd really encourage you to hear that out, because this is a huge question that I am not going to be able to do justice to in a minute or two. Just for a starter, I would say one big thing that Jesus would, I think, reply to the question of why he hasn't dealt with injustice already completely, is that if he was going to eradicate all injustice right now, he would have to eradicate me, and he would have to eradicate all of us. I mean, there are literally people, ethicists and environmentalists, advocating for the eradication of humanity, you know, that it would be a good thing because we're destroying the world. The message of Jesus is that God will come back and do justice, that Jesus will return and judge justly and restore everything and make everything right. But in order for us to be part of that, we need to let him deal with both the ways in which we are already guilty of injustice and with the things inside us that mean that we are a source of injustice. That mean that if you let us into a perfect world, it won't be long before it isn't perfect anymore. And Jesus offers to deal with that through what he does on the cross and in the resurrection and in filling us with his renewing life, like I was talking about. There's just too many other things that I'd want to say about that. But perhaps one place to go is just to ask yourself why it is that this question, why hasn't God fixed all the things that are wrong in the world, is a reason not to believe in God far, far more commonly in Western, well-off, post-Enlightenment societies, and actually in cultures where there is a huge amount more day-to-day suffering. There is often this is much less of a powerful argument against God, and I think that's really interesting. And it tells you that a big assumption of that argument against God is the assumption that there could be a God who was big enough to be responsible for dealing with all of the evil in the world, but at the same time small enough that my rationality ought to be able to understand everything that he does and why. So that would be just one question that I'd want to ask to start that conversation, but you should come back tonight because there'll be more time to explore it.
Great. The second question is, you claimed that no one is purely a victim, but what about babies?
Oh, yeah, that's a really hard question. What I mean by no one is purely a victim is that none of us can come to Jesus and say, I've only ever been wronged by other people. I'm not responsible for any of the wrong and pain and injustice in this world, so I don't need forgiveness. All I need is vindication. Not one of us can say that to him. I think when it comes to infants and the tragedy of infants dying, I basically think that the Bible doesn't sort of tell you what to do if you're an infant that's dying, because that doesn't make any sense. That's not what it's for. And the Bible doesn't speak in lots of detail to all of the questions we might have. It speaks to us about what we need to know. But I am confident that God will do what is loving and just with every single human being. And I'm confident that I can trust that because we see God's character when he comes and he literally dies in agony for us in Jesus on the cross. He goes through hell for us to forgive us and give us life if we'll just accept it. And so I trust God's character, and I trust that when it comes to tragedies like that and the millions of infants who died before they've really been able to consciously respond to God or anything like that, that God knows what he's doing and he's perfectly capable of showing his love and his goodness to them.
Thank you. Next question we have, I think it's just been voted up, so I've lost it. Oh, there we go. Why do we need an explanation for things? Why can't they just happen?
That's a really profound question. And I would say that this is the way out of the logic of Marquis de Sade and all of this stuff. If you would like to continue believing in justice passionately, and you would like to ignore God, you are free to do so, but you will have to disconnect your kind of moral instincts from your worldview. And I want to suggest that is, firstly, really intellectually dishonest. I don't think you need to do that, and I don't think as thinking people, we should be wanting to do that. We should want to live in a way that is consistent with reality, with the truth, and we should desire to know the truth. And maybe you disagree with me, but I imagine that a lot of you don't. But the other thing I would say is that if you have convictions, but you don't have a worldview that makes sense of those convictions, my guess is that the convictions eventually will exhaust you, because you are basically trying to provide all of the resources for you to live out that conviction entirely from within your own subjective experience. And when you feel like it's not making any difference, when you feel like there is no hope, you will have nothing in you that can allow you to carry on. Whereas if you realize that actually the world is not fundamentally a bleak, impersonal world, that the universe is created by a personal God, that love isn't an illusion, that justice isn't a fantasy, that those things are built in to reality, and that ultimately, because of Jesus' death and his resurrection, as Martin Luther King said, that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. If you know that, that gives you strength. That gives you hope, like Augustine was talking about. So I'd encourage you not to try and live the impoverished life that comes if you try and separate your worldview from your convictions.
Great. Next question we have is a really good question. If Christians believe this, what you're saying about anger and courage and hope, then why do they still hurt others?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's, this one is not a mystery in the way that the bigger question about God and injustice is. Basically, the way that the Bible talks about it is that when we come before Jesus like that man, and he forgives us, and he starts to renew us, he doesn't immediately kind of perform a complete executive takeover of our personality, of our hearts, so that we are immediately nothing like what we were before. We're exactly like Jesus. What he does is he starts to transform us and renew us and change us through our relationship with him. And so when you see Christians today, maybe a Christian that you know, or when you look at history and you see Christians, you are not seeing 100% what God wants them to be. You're seeing a really messy mixture of what good God is working in them and the selfishness and the greed and the kind of turning in on themselves that is left over, that's still kicking around and destroying things. And one day when Jesus comes back, if we've trusted in him, he will make us completely the people we were made to be, and I cannot wait. The other thing I would say is that when you look at history, and when you look across the world, you should not assume that everybody who's done something in the name of Jesus had actually come to him like this man, had asked for and received forgiveness for the ways that they were part of the problem in the world, and had started to be renewed. There are plenty of people in the history of this world who have used the name of Jesus or the power of institutional religion to do evil things and have not actually let Jesus change them. And I would just encourage you, as you look at history, to ask yourself again and again, was the problem here that these people took Jesus too seriously, or that they didn't take Jesus seriously enough? Was the problem that they were following Jesus too closely, or that they needed to follow him more closely? And you see that people like Martin Luther King, people like William Wilberforce, campaigners who just spent their lives saying to people who claim to believe in Jesus, would you listen to him? Would you actually listen to him? So, I've gone off on one there, but that would be my answer.
That's a helpful start, thank you. Why are humans and animals so different? Why do they not have the capacity to love, etc., and humans do? How can you be so confident we're so different? What about evolution?
There are so many good questions in there, and I'll try and keep track of them. I guess what this argument boils down to is not saying that there are no behavioral traits in animals that are cooperative, or that every animal ever has just acted in naked, unsophisticated, individual self-interest. Obviously, that's not the case. There are all sorts of kind of ways of working together with your family, your group, etc., and so on. And I don't pretend to be an expert on kind of evolution or anything. I studied English literature. Come on, people. I don't know anything useful at all. But what I would say is it really boils down to when you look at an animal harming another animal in order to eat or live or reproduce or whatever it might be, can you look at that animal and say, that is wrong, you should not do that? And if not, because it's natural, then when you look at a human hurting another person, or even in fact hurting an animal for their own enjoyment or for their own good or whatever, do you look at that and say that's natural? Because if you think that it is just a sliding scale of sophistication, then there is no fundamental moral difference at all between the lion ripping the gazelle to shreds and a serial killer. If you think it's just a sliding scale, then it's a matter of degree, not of qualitative difference. But if you believe, like many Christians do, that God used a process of evolution to create, but that there is something fundamentally different that he has done in creating human beings in his own image, that as much as you can't see it in a fossil record, there is a fundamental distinction between beings who have the capacity for relationship and love and truth and justice that is a reflection of God, and animals who don't, who we're responsible to care for, then it makes sense that there's a moral difference. There's 1,000 trains of thought that I could follow there, but I shouldn't.
Yeah,
Please do grab me if you want to talk more about that. I'd love to talk more.
Yeah, we're running out of time for all these questions, and they are fantastic. So do come and grab Mike at the end, or chat with people on your tables afterwards. We'll just go for one last one. How can we be good enough people then? How can we be forgiven?
Great. I mean, the basic answer is do what this guy did, right? This paralyzed man. He couldn't do any. I mean, it's an amazing kind of poetic picture, right? He couldn't do anything himself. He was not going to be able to kind of get up and go out and make himself a good person and deal with all the things he'd done wrong and put them all right. All he could do was say, please take me to Jesus. And if we come to Jesus, what he does is he takes all of the consequences and the price that justice demands for all of the wrong that we've done, he takes it off us and onto himself. If we'll just put our trust in him, he says, right, everything that is yours is mine, everything that is mine is yours. And so he takes all of those consequences, he bears them himself as he dies on the cross, and he deals with them forever. And he gives us everything that's his. And that means he gives us his, like when you get married, right? His Father becomes our Father. His Spirit comes to live in us and transform us. It becomes our spirit. His moral beauty becomes our moral beauty. And so as we kind of are united to him just by trusting him, that begins to transform us. And immediately it changes everything in terms of how we are in relationship with God. So I'd really encourage you to come back tonight, to come back Thursday and Friday, particularly in the evenings, if that's you and you want to find out more about who Jesus really is and what it looks like to take hold of him and to be transformed by him.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your questions. They're fantastic. And can we give Mike a round of applause for things? Wonderful. Well, we're coming to the end of our lunchtime, and we're so glad you could join us. Really thankful that you took the time out of a busy day to come and be here. But we don't want this to be the end of the conversation. Please do stick around if you have some time. We're going to have some hot drinks coming out as well if you'd like a cup of tea or anything like that. Or come back this evening. We've got an international dinner on the question of, I think it's plan, providence, and punishment. How can we make sense of suffering? And the food tonight is Afro-Caribbean night. And then this evening, later on, back in here, we have our next evening talk, which is on holding on when it hurts. We're going to be hearing from students' experiences of like what's kept them going, what's given them hope through the difficult times of life. Matt's going to be speaking to us again. It's going to be a really wonderful evening, so we'd love it if you could come back here. The other thing to flag up is the feedback form. I don't know if that's on the screens. We'd love to know how we can make these events better. So if the QR code could come up on the screen, hopefully, we'd love it if you could scan that. Tell us how you found it. We'd love to know your thoughts. And finally, there are lots of books on your way out the door, and I'd love to just flag two of them for you. First one is called Making Sense of Life. It's a really easy book to read. It's got questions on human rights, what makes us worthy of human rights. It's got stuff on society, why is our society so polarized, and a bit of more thinking of like whether the Christian faith has anything to say to the biggest questions we have. And the other one is Confronting Jesus. Perhaps you've never really thought about the person of Jesus. Maybe you didn't even know if he was historically real. This is a fantastic book, just to tell you about who he was, what he did. If you want to see whether what Mike was saying about that generosity, dignity, and peace-bringing is actually true, why not read that book and see for yourself what you think of the person of Jesus. But that's all for now. We've loved having you. Please come back and join us again soon. Thank you so much for being here.